Hollywood swore June 2026 would print money. 15 times, it printed pain instead. In June 2026, they learned the hard way that you don't. Big brands, beloved legends, superhero logos. Everyone walked in cocky and limped out broke. 15 movies, 15 disasters in a row. The audience finally stopped showing up. So is this a wake-up call or the end? Number 15. Carolina. Caroline, the crime spree had style. But the box office getaway never happened. Caroline came into June with a pulpy setup made for indie crime fans. A young woman fleeing a small Texas town, a charming con man, a romantic run through the American South, and the slow transformation of an ordinary runaway into a criminal icon. With Samara Weaving, Kyle Gallner, and Kyra Sedgwick attached, the film had enough recognizable names to create curiosity. But the theatrical result was tiny. With only around $264,507 domestic from 243 theaters, Caroline became a strong limited-release flop pick. That number is rough because the movie was not hidden on just a handful of screens. It had enough theaters to be noticed, but not enough audience interest to matter. Indie crime dramas need fierce reviews, festival buzz, or a trailer that makes viewers feel they are discovering something dangerous. Caroline never broke through. It looks stylish, but style alone does not sell tickets when bigger films dominate attention. The film promised a getaway, but financially, it never made it out of town. Number 14. Coutur. Even Angelina Jolie could not turn the runway into a box office event. Coutur arrived in June with elegance, prestige, and the kind of glossy Paris Fashion Week setting that should have made it feel expensive, emotional, and adult. The film had Angelina Jolie at the center, a glamorous fashion world backdrop, and a story about women crossing paths under pressure, ambition, illness, and reinvention. On paper, it sounded like serious counter-programming against superheroes, sequels, and loud summer releases. But the box office response was almost silent. With only around $135,306 domestic from 235 theaters, Coutur became one of June's weakest theatrical performers. That number is especially painful because Jolie's name still carries recognition, but recognition did not turn into ticket sales. The problem was urgency. Prestige dramas now need awards buzz, viral conversation, or a must-see emotional hook to survive in theaters. Coutur looked beautiful, but beauty alone could not fight bigger brands and louder marketing. Viewers may discover it later at home, but theatrically, it barely registered. The runway lights were bright, the seats were empty, and the silence was brutal for a film built on glamour and star power. Number 13. The Death of Robin Hood. Some legends return to theaters like heroes. This one arrived like a wounded man, riding into his final battle. The Death of Robin Hood came into June with the kind of prestige package that should have created serious curiosity. Hugh Jackman, Jodie Comer, a darker version of a famous outlaw, and a title that promised finality, regret, violence, and mythic drama. On paper, it sounded like strong adult counter-programming in a summer crowded with superheroes, sequels, and family films. But the box office response was painfully quiet. The film earned only around $4.8 million from more than 1,700 theaters, a weak result for a movie carrying names that recognizable. The problem was urgency. Robin Hood is one of cinema's oldest legends, but familiarity can become a trap when audiences are not convinced this version matters now. A darker, heavier take may attract film fans, but casual viewers need more than atmosphere. They need a reason to leave the house. The Death of Robin Hood never gave them that reason strongly enough. Instead of becoming a prestige event, it became another adult drama swallowed by the summer machine. The legend was famous, the cast was powerful, but the audience stayed away. Number 12. Little Brother. Little Brother did not bomb at the box office because it barely entered that battlefield at all. Instead, it became a different kind of June disappointment. The kind of movie with recognizable names that arrived on streaming and still felt strangely invisible. On paper, Little Brother had enough ingredients to make noise. John Cena brought comedy muscle, Michelle Monaghan added familiar star power, and the premise had a simple sitcom-friendly hook. A polished real estate agent's carefully controlled life gets wrecked when his chaotic younger brother suddenly reappears. That setup should have promised awkward family tension, broad laughs, and easy streaming appeal. But the problem was impact. As a Netflix release, Little Brother had no theatrical box office numbers to collapse over, but it also had no major cultural moment, no loud audience conversation, and no sense that viewers were rushing to watch it. That makes it useful for this list, only if you are counting streaming disappointments alongside theatrical flops. The movie looked like something designed to be clicked, watched casually, and forgotten just as quickly. In a month filled with louder failures, Little Brother did not crash loudly. It faded quietly. Sometimes that is even worse. A theatrical flop at least leaves a visible crater. Little Brother simply arrived, got buried in the streaming scroll, and disappeared before it could become an event. Number 11. Power Ballad. The movie had famous voices, but the audience never joined the chorus. Power Ballad looked like the kind of mid-budget summer comedy that should have found a comfortable lane. Paul Rudd brought likable comic timing. Nick Jonas brought pop star recognition. And the story had an easy hook. A washed-up wedding singer watches a younger celebrity turn his song into a comeback hit, then decides he wants the spotlight back. That setup promised music, jealousy, comedy, ego, and maybe a little emotional redemption. But the box office barely sang. Despite a wider Lionsgate release, Power Ballad reached only about $2.6 million domestic, making it one of June's clearer comedy underperformers. The issue was not that the idea had no appeal. The issue was that it never felt necessary. Musical comedies are difficult theatrical sells because audiences need either huge songs, huge spectacle, or huge word of mouth. Power Ballad had recognizable faces, but not enough heat around the movie itself. It looked like something people might watch later at home, not something they needed to rush out for opening weekend. That is where the flop status becomes painful. It was not crushed by scandal or a massive budget. It simply arrived, played its tune, and discovered that almost nobody was listening. For a movie about chasing a hit song, Power Ballad could not create a box office hit of its own. Number 10. The Get Out. Russell Crowe brought the danger, but the box office never found the exit. The Get Out looked like the kind of gritty action thriller that should have pulled in fans of crime stories, shootouts, betrayals, and older tough guy cinema. It had Russell Crowe as a nightclub owner trying to escape his violent past, with Nina Dobrev, Aaron Paul, Luke Evans, and Teresa Palmer adding recognizable faces around him. The setup had everything a late June thriller needs: masked gunmen, cartel pressure, a dangerous business deal, and a man trapped between survival and one last mistake. But the release never felt big enough to become an event. Instead of breaking through as a muscular adult thriller, The Get Out arrived quietly in limited theaters and VOD, which made its theatrical impact feel small from the start. The problem was visibility. In a month crowded with superheroes, sequels, animation, war action, and bigger studio noise, this movie did not have the marketing power to demand attention. It looked like something action fans might discover later at home, not something they needed to chase in theaters. That makes it a useful June underperformer. The cast gave it names. The premise gave it danger. But the box office gave it silence. The Get Out promised escape, but financially, it barely got through the door. Number 9. Passenger. The ride started with promise, but the box office never reached its destination. Passenger had a setup that should have worked better than this. Tension on the move, danger closing in, strangers trapped together, and the kind of thriller energy that usually sells itself in a trailer. Audiences understand the fear of being stuck somewhere with no clean escape. A train, a car, a plane, a bus. Put danger inside a confined space, and the premise instantly becomes marketable. But Passenger never turned that simple fear into a real theatrical event. The film earned around $18 million total domestic, but in June, it brought in only about $2.6 million, while still playing on more than 2,000 screens. That is not the sign of a movie building momentum. That is the sign of a movie fading while theaters are still available. Thrillers need speed. They need word of mouth. They need audiences telling friends that the suspense is worth seeing now. Passenger did not create that conversation. It became the kind of mid-level release that looks useful on a streaming menu, but weak on a theatrical chart. The premise had movement, but the numbers were stuck. In a crowded month full of louder choices, Passenger became exactly what every studio fears: a movie with a sellable idea, decent reach, and almost no lasting heat. Number 8. Jackass. Best and last. The final stunt was supposed to be a victory lap, but the box office barely flinched. Jackass. Best and last arrived with nostalgia, a loyal fan base, and the promise of one last chaotic farewell from a crew that turned pain, stupidity, and reckless bravery into pop culture. For decades, the brand survived because it felt dangerous, ridiculous, and impossible to fake. But this time, The theatrical excitement was much weaker. The film opened to numbers that were not catastrophic for a low-budget comedy, but still disappointing for a franchise built on recognition, shock value, and loyal fans. Its budget was modest, yet the worldwide start barely matched the production cost, leaving little room for marketing, theater splits, or meaningful profit. That is why this belongs in the borderline flop category. It did not explode into financial disaster, but it also did not feel like a triumphant goodbye. The deeper issue was timing. Jackass once felt shocking because audiences had never seen anything like it. By 2026, online chaos, prank channels, viral stunts, and short-form madness had changed the game completely. What once felt rebellious now had to compete with free insanity on every phone. The loyal fans remembered. The casual viewers shrugged. Jackass, best and last, did not fail because people forgot the crew. It struggled because the world had caught up to their chaos, and the final ride felt smaller than the legend behind it, leaving a surprisingly quiet goodbye instead of a loud final theatrical celebration farewell. Number 7. The Amazing Digital Circus, The Last Act. The online fanbase was massive, but the theatrical tent was not big enough. The Amazing Digital Circus, The Last Act, arrived with built-in internet recognition, colorful chaos, surreal comedy, and a fan community that had already turned the brand into a digital phenomenon. On paper, that should have made the movie feel like a smart bet. Studios love internet-native properties because they appear to come with a ready-made audience. The problem is that online attention does not always become ticket sales. Fans will comment, share, edit, meme, and defend a property for free, but asking them to show up in theaters is a much harder test. The film made around $23.4 million domestic, which is not an embarrassing number in isolation. But with more than 2,000 theaters and the pressure of being treated like a bigger crossover event, the result felt underwhelming. It proved the gap between digital popularity and theatrical power. The core fans showed up, but the casual audience did not fully understand why they needed to care. For people outside the fandom, the movie may have looked loud, strange, and confusing, instead of essential. That is where the disappointment lives. The brand was visible everywhere online, yet the box office never became a true breakout. The circus had lights, color, noise, and loyal fans. What it needed was a wider audience willing to buy a ticket. Number 6. Masters of the Universe. He-Man raised his sword and screamed, "I have the power." The box office looked at him and said, "We don't care." Amazon MGM had been building toward this moment for years. They had Travis Knight, director of the beloved Bumblebee, behind the camera. They had Nicholas Galitzine as the ripped, earnest Prince Adam. They had Idris Elba as Man-at-Arms, Camila Mendes as Tila, and fatally Jared Leto as Skeletor. Critics actually liked it. The film scored a respectable 68% on Rotten Tomatoes. Dolph Lundgren, the original He-Man from the 1987 film, showed up in a cameo. Everything seemed positioned for a moderately successful franchise launch. Then the opening numbers came in. $29.3 million domestic, $25 million international. A $54 million global debut on a $170 to $200 million budget. Amazon tried to spin this as a solid start. Nobody was buying it. Only 4% of the opening weekend audience was under the age of 12. The very demographic the studio needed to build a future franchise around. The adults who showed up were nostalgic. The kids who should have shown up weren't born when He-Man was relevant. And then there was Jared Leto. He played Skeletor, the iconic blue skull-faced villain, but barely promoted the film. After Tron, Ares hemorrhaged over $130 million for Disney just 8 months earlier. Leto's name had become radioactive. Amazon quietly buried him in the marketing materials. Leto barely appeared on the press tour. His name went unspoken in trailers. It did not help. By the end of its run, Masters of the Universe had limped to around $103 million worldwide. A franchise designed to build an empire built nothing. He-Man was defeated. Not by Skeletor, by audience indifference. But June was only half the crime scene. Before those summer disasters even arrived, May had already turned theaters into a financial graveyard, where bigger brands, louder hype, and even beloved icons learned the same brutal lesson. Audiences were no longer buying promises. Number 5. Star Wars, The Mandalorian, and Grogu. Disney promised Star Wars' return to theaters after 7 years. What they delivered was the lowest-grossing Star Wars film in franchise history. The plan made sense on paper. Din Djarin and Grogu, Pedro Pascal, and everyone's favorite green toddler had captivated Disney Plus audiences for 3 seasons. Jon Favreau wrote the screenplay himself. The budget was a relatively restrained $165 million. Baby Yoda merchandise was already a billion-dollar empire. This should have been a victory lap. Instead, it became a cautionary tale about the limits of streaming goodwill. The Mandalorian and Grogu opened Memorial Day weekend to $81.7 million, domestic, the worst Star Wars opening since Attack of the Clones in 2002. That was the bad news. Then came the catastrophic second weekend, a 69% domestic drop. The film fell from first to third place, overtaken by both Backrooms, a micro-budget A24 horror film made for $10 million, and Obsession, which cost $750,000. The lowest-grossing Star Wars film in history was losing a domestic foot race to a movie that cost less than a single day of its catering budget. By June 2026, the worldwide total sat at roughly $321 million, against a break-even point estimated at $400 to $600 million. Disney had tried to rebuild its Star Wars movie franchise using its most beloved TV characters. Those characters were beloved on a streaming platform, where the habit was convenience and comfort. The theater demands something more: urgency, spectacle, and a reason to leave your couch. The Mandalorian and Grogu gave audiences a reason to stay home. This is the way to fail. Number 4. Mortal Kombat 3. The sequel was hyped as endgame level. The producers said test audiences jumped out of their seats. They were lying. Mortal Kombat 2 had every reason to succeed. The 2021 original overperformed, despite a simultaneous HBO Max release. Karl Urban, one of the most charismatic actors working today, joined the cast as the fan-beloved Johnny Cage. The original director Simon McQuoid returned. The studio gave him a bigger budget, $80 million, up from the original's $55 million. Early test screenings sent producers into hyperbolic overdrive. Jeremy Slater and Greg Russo publicly compared audience reactions to Avengers: Endgame, every joke landing, people jumping out of their seats. Then the studio made the fatal mistake. Mortal Kombat 2 was originally scheduled for October 2025, a clear release window with minimal competition. McQuoid said the delay was because the film was like a massive summer blockbuster, so they pushed it to May 8, 2026. Right into the path of The Devil Wears Prada 2, Michael, the surprise horror phenomenon Backrooms, and 1 week before The Mandalorian and Grogu monopolized every available screen. The film opened to $40 million domestic and $23 million international, a $63 million global debut that landed below its own projections. By the end of its run, it had made $127 million worldwide on an $80 million budget. That needed to be $150 to $200 million just to approach profitability. The studio rushed it to digital within a month. Critics actually liked it 65% on Rotten Tomatoes. Audiences loved it, 87% audience score. It was a good movie that was treated like a guaranteed blockbuster by executives who forgot that hype is not a release strategy. Flawless victory? Not even close. Fatality? Self-inflicted. Number 3. Animal Farm. Andy Serkis spent 15 years turning George Orwell's darkest nightmare into an animated comedy. Then he united conservatives, liberals, and children in one shared emotion: disgust. This one defies logic. Andy Serkis, the man behind Gollum, Caesar in Planet of the Apes, Venom, spent over a decade trying to get Animal Farm made. Netflix bought it. Netflix dropped it. He kept going. Cinesite came aboard. An adventure. Angel Studios eventually picked up distribution rights in December 2025. The voice cast was extraordinary. Seth Rogen, Glenn Close, Kieran Culkin, Woody Harrelson, Steve Buscemi, Jim Parsons. The animation premiered at the Annecy International Animation Film Festival in 2025, to respectful applause. Then came the interpretation problem. Circus and writer Nicholas Stoller made a decision: shift Orwell's brutal Stalinist allegory into a commentary on modern corporate greed and consumerism. They added a new protagonist, a young piglet named Lucky, and aimed for something more uplifting. The original novel ends in horror. This one aimed for something kinder. The result was a film too dark for children and too soft for adults. It landed between every possible audience and satisfied none of them. Conservative viewers raged that the anti-communist heart of the original had been gutted. Progressive critics gave it a 24% on Rotten Tomatoes, The consensus, a dry joke about all adaptations being equal. Angel Studios' own fan base, built on faith-driven crowd pleasers, cried foul. Angel had built its reputation on movies like Sound of Freedom and Bonhoeffer. This was none of those. Animal Farm opened to $3.3 million domestic on a $35 million budget. It finished with $6.2 million worldwide. 15 years of passion. One catastrophic miscalculation of what audiences actually wanted from George Orwell. The pigs took over. Nobody watched. Number 2. The Sheep Detectives. Critics gave it 95%. Audiences gave it 96%. Amazon gave it a $75 million budget. Hollywood gave it a release date directly between two films that made $600 million each. The Sheep Detectives is one of 2026's most genuinely heartbreaking box office stories, because the film is legitimately wonderful, and almost nobody saw it at the right time. Directed by Kyle Balda and written by Craig Mazin, it follows a flock of sheep who investigate the murder of their beloved shepherd George, played by Hugh Jackman, after he reads them detective novels every night. Convinced they understand nothing, they understand everything. The premise sounds absurd. The execution was enchanting. Funny, mysterious, emotionally devastating in ways nobody expected from a movie about wool-covered farm animals. The voice cast was a marvel. Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Bryan Cranston, Patrick Stewart, Bella Ramsey, Brett Goldstein, Emma Thompson. Critics ran out of compliments. The New York Times called it beautifully balanced. The Hollywood Reporter praised Jackman's charisma remarkable, considering he spends most of the film as a corpse. The audience score matched the critics. Everyone who saw it loved it. The problem was the calendar. The Sheep Detectives opened May 8th, 1 week after The Devil Wears Prada 2 exploded to $77 million in its opening weekend, and 2 weeks after Michael crossed $600 million worldwide. These were not horror films or niche releases. These were all-consuming pop culture events that vacuumed up screens and casual moviegoers for weeks. The Sheep Detectives opened to $15 million domestic. It reached $126 million worldwide. Not enough, on a $75 million budget, needing $188 million to break even. A perfect film, killed by a murderous release calendar. The Sheep solved the case. The studio couldn't solve the schedule. Number 1. Billie Eilish, Hit Me Hard and Soft the Tour, Live in 3D. Billie Eilish teamed up with James Cameron. Together they made the best concert film of the year. And it still couldn't match what Taylor Swift did on a Tuesday. Everything about this film was correct. Billie Eilish co-directed with James Cameron a pairing so unlikely and so inspired, it made headlines before a single frame was released. The concert film documented her Manchester shows from the Hit Me Hard and Soft tour, captured in jaw-dropping 3D that let audiences see every detail the artist herself saw from the stage. The premiere at the Westwood Village Theatre was electric. Fans danced outside. They filmed the screen inside. Cameron and Eilish took the stage together. It was the best opening for a concert movie in 3 years. Eilish is 24, a 2-time Oscar winner, the first person born in the 21st century to win both a Grammy and an Academy Award. And still, Taylor Swift's Eras Tour made $37.7 million on its opening day alone. Billie Eilish made $4.5 million on opening day. The global total across opening weekend was $20 million strong for a concert doc. Genuinely respectable, but a long way from the cultural juggernaut that the James Cameron partnership had promised. The audience was 90% under 35, predominantly female. That core fan base showed up. The casual filmgoer did not. Cameron's presence alone couldn't expand the tent beyond the converted. The comparison to Taylor Swift will follow this film forever. That is genuinely unfair. The Eras Tour was a once-in-a-generation cultural event. Billie Eilish is one of the most important artists of her generation, but she is still becoming that. Her biggest theatrical moment almost certainly still lies ahead. This film was not a bomb by concert doc standards. It was a bomb by the standards of its own ambition and the legend of the man who co-directed it. When you put James Cameron's name on a movie, the world expects Titanic. What they got was great. What they expected was impossible. 15 movies, 15 warnings, and one brutal lesson Hollywood still refuses to learn. Audiences cannot be forced into theaters by nostalgia, logos, stars, sequels, or expensive marketing alone. Some of these films were bad bets. Others were crushed by timing, competition, or changing habits. But the result was the same. The money vanished, the excuses started, and summer 2026 became a box office crime scene.